Hello, friends. It's your boy Jeff, and we're back with another installment in the Confessions of a Comic Book Junkie series. This one I'm kind of calling Origin Story Part 2. Reason being, there were many roads to my becoming a comic book fan. And what I'm going to talk about today is the concept of back issues. You know, of reading older books that had come out before you were even born in some cases, or certainly before you became a comic book fan. And companies like Marvel and DC did have specific titles dedicated to reprinting older issues of the series. Primarily, for Marvel's case, it would be like Spider-Man. I think he's probably the most reprinted hero in their entire lineup. But there was a title called Marvel Tales, which reprinted, for the most part, good long runs of older Spider-Man comics. Sometimes they were edited because due to page count, which shrank in the 70s. So I know certain titles got edited. Panels here and there were cut. But later on down the line, that was all restored. That's a story for another day. But for a young kid like I was in the mid to late 70s, there was really only a very few ways to read older material on characters or series that you were interested in. Because, of course, at that time I was, 6, 7, 8 years old. I didn't have any money, certainly. So it's not like I could, A, get myself to a comic book shop, and B, have the money to spend on back issues to catch up, so to speak, on these series. But going to the mall, like I always did with my mom and dad at the time, I did see this book, and I'm just going to show it to you here. Origins of Marvel Comics by Stan Lee. This was a soft cover book. I think there's hardcovers of these. I think maybe the first printings were hardcover. The one I have came in a slipcase. This isn't I rebought these books later because I read these literally till they fell apart. But this, the one I bought later on, came in a slipcase along with the second book called Son of Origins. We'll get to that in a minute. But this originally came out in 1974, and it basically all the heroes you see on this cover are featured in the book. You get the origin story, which not necessarily was the first issue of a series, but for the most part it was, of Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, the Hulk. Who else was in here? Doctor Strange. And Thor. This is a wonderful John Romita drawn cover. He was a famous artist for Marvel, known mostly for his work on Spider-Man after Steve Ditko left in the mid-60s. But by the time this book came out, he had moved up in the ranks and wasn't really drawing monthly comics that much anymore. He was doing special projects like this, like covers for books like this. But what these were, you would get a basically factual introduction by Stan Lee. There would be, there'd be some text here at the beginning, and he would talk about how he came up with the idea for the character, in this case, say the Fantastic Four. But Stan Lee famously always commented on how faulty his memory was. So it's not like it's a 100% factually accurate history of the character itself, but like here's the cover of Fantastic Four #1 that was reprinted. And the cool thing with this book was they usually paired the origin story with a later story in the series. So you got something that was a little more modern, slightly more modern for the time. Like they also reprinted Fantastic Four 55. The Thing fights the Silver Surfer. Love that look on a surfer's face when the Thing knocks him through the wall. And it was just the only way that I knew of that I could afford to read some older material. So, like I said, I had all these that I'm going to show you. I ended up having to rebuy because I read them so much, and they ended up getting trashed. But you have the Hulk. You get his origin story, plus you get this one here where he fights the Submariner, which was always kind of cool. Then, of course, Spider-Man. You got the origin story in Amazing Fantasy 15. Famously, that was the last issue of the series, so they did a what the heck, let's go for it thing on taking a chance on an unknown character called Spider-Man. Ended up becoming a huge hit, and then he got his own series, and the rest, they say, is history. And then that was also reprinted with a somewhat later issue, Spider-Man 72. Some of the choices are kind of odd for these books because the Thor one, Journey into Mystery, was the title number 83. That was the first appearance and origin of Thor, which was kind of cool. And the slightly more modern one here, Thor 143, he's barely in the book. So it's like he's there at the beginning and then he's there at the end, but you do get a lot of giant single page illustrations by the great Jack Kirby. We're going to be talking about Jack Kirby in this series later on as we go. There is a ton of material that I have of Jack Kirby's to show and talk about. But yeah, this was like the beginning of me piecing together the history of Marvel Comics. And this book was such a hit, of course, they made a follow-up, as I alluded to when I showed the slipcase. This was the second book in the series, Son of Origins of Marvel Comics. This came out in 1975. And as you can see by the characters on the cover, we get stories of Iron Man, the Avengers, Daredevil, the X-Men, Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., the Silver Surfer, which they reprint the entire Silver Surfer origin, which was the first issue of his solo series. This was the last story in the book. This one was really good. In a way, I almost like this one a little bit better than the first one, just in the choice of characters and material. Although the one thing I didn't get was, I don't know why they gave us the origin or a short story of the Watcher. That really didn't make any sense to me. I mean, you get, Gene Colan drew this. He's another famous Marvel artist. Most famously known for his work on Daredevil and Iron Man, among others. But that one was a bit of a mystery because it just didn't seem like it was anything that was all that current or important to the Marvel Universe, but they did it anyway. But yeah, the Nick Fury origin, I'm just showing you the covers here. They get reprinted. This was in Strange Tales 135. We get the origin of how Nick Fury became an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. We got Daredevil in here. Now in this book, you didn't always get a origin and then another backup story. For a few you did, but for some, like in the Silver Surfer case, you just got the one. But for nothing else, just reading the origin stories or even the first issues of a lot of these series, like Avengers 1 here, was pretty monumental and pretty important in my comic book history development, I guess you could say. The Iron Man story was kind of... I don't know why they picked this one, because the Tales of Suspense series, which was a split book that Iron Man and Cap shared in the 60s, you know, it was just a cliffhanger book. So the story, you would come in on the story, you didn't really know what was going on. Like in this case, I didn't, because this was the only one that I'd read up to this point. So you don't really know what happened in the first, you know, the story before, and then it ends on a cliffhanger. So you're like, even as a kid, I'm like, what happened next? But overall, this was an important factor in my becoming a comic book fan. Then, in 1976, you got Bring On the Bad Guys. I love the cover to this book. It's another John Romita cover, and then you can see this was all about, obviously, some of the villains, some of the greatest villains of the Marvel Universe at the time. Of course, you got Doctor Doom, Green Goblin, Red Skull, Loki, Dormammu, Mephisto, all of them featured in this book. And this one was even a little more... not a little more better. I liked this one even a little more better than the other two. Just because of the choice of stories was really solid. Again, you got a full-length Silver Surfer story. This is one where he goes up against Mephisto. You got the origin of Doctor Doom, which was, they reprinted Fantastic Four #5. Let me call that. Let's see that, but they didn't reprint the covers on a lot of these, so not all of these books were all that consistent. So you just got this. But they did do a brief backup story that showed you the origin of Doctor Doom, how he got, how he learned like all of his tricks and how he got this suit of armor and all that stuff. And then, of course, Dormammu is a villain of Doctor Strange. Should be familiar if you've seen the Doctor Strange movie. This was a two-parter, and they reprinted both parts, so at least you got a complete story. And then with Loki, they reprinted several of these short little backup stories called Tales of Asgard, which were featured on the back of the Thor book for a while there in the 60s, and it talks about Loki's origin, where he came from. And then in this case, you also got a second full-length story with the Absorbing Man, Thor fighting the Absorbing Man, who was being controlled by Loki. So, and then of course, Cap being one of my favorites, we get the origin of the Red Skull. This was another full-length story. So, yeah, I really dug these books, and saved up my pennies and asked for them as gifts and did whatever I could to try to get them. So, and they all did not meet a great end. They were subject to the tender mercies of a young kid who kind of threw them around and flipped the pages and read them over and over and over and over until the pages literally fell out. And then in 1977, you got the superhero women. So same as the rest. You had stories that featured Sue Richards, Invisible Girl, Medusa, Black Widow, Ms. Marvel, Red Sonja, the Wasp. None of them really look like they do today in the modern Marvel universe, but back in the 60s and 70s, this is what they looked like. And just like all the others, you got some little text pages here and then a story. Interestingly enough, there was another oddball choice for this one called The Fury of the Femizons. So it was drawn in black and white by John Romita, written by Stan Lee, but the Femizons were not anything that was really part of mainstream Marvel. So it was it appeared in a magazine called Savage Tales, which was a Conan the Barbarian featured magazine. But we'll be talking about him too at some point. But just to see like this black and white pencil artwork was kind of different from seeing, all of the usual color stuff. So it was kind of interesting. But, and then of course, the superhero women got remastered or reissued, so to speak, many decades later as the Women of Marvel. So a couple of stories that were originally printed here got reprinted here, and then it was expanded with different characters. So in this one, you get She-Hulk, the Dazzler, Rogue, Storm, a lot of the more modern female characters of the Marvel Universe. So it's kind of a mix. And but this one didn't even have text. It just reprinted stuff. Like this was a solo Rogue story from X-Men 182 that happened right after the first Secret Wars series in 1984. That's how nerdy I am. But yeah, you got a 2-part X-Men story featuring not only Storm, but the White Queen, Kitty Pryde, and they fight the Sentinels. That was pretty awesome. But yeah, I really wish they would kind of reissue these with all new stories. They could easily sell it. But these days at Marvel, and I'll probably be doing a couple part series on the Marvel Masterworks books, and to a lesser extent the DC Archives books. Those were hardcover, full color reprint series of titles of different characters, of which I have very, very many of them. So, yeah, when it comes to back issues, when it comes to reading older material, nowadays, it's very easy. I mean, if you've got, the money, of course, you can pretty much track down any back issue you want, whether it be on eBay or any number of comic websites. The one that I used the most was mycomicshop.com. They were the company that I got my monthly comics from, or my mail order, I should say, and I got them delivered once a month. So I picked them because they had probably the best selection of back issues that I've come across. And when it came to pre-ordering new comics, they had a progressive discount system. Whereas once you hit certain spending levels, you got a greater discount. So that kind of helped me to buy some of the more expensive hardcover collections, because that would basically pay for the rest of my books for that month. So, but like I said, nowadays, if you've got the internet, and a credit card, you can basically find anything you want. And that's not even, we're not even talking about going to comic shows, which is just like going to record shows, except it's all about comics. And I picked up many, many key issues there. But yeah, when it comes to my personal history as becoming a comic book fan, going back to read the older stuff, like I said, was really the only way I was able to do it for a good long time, was reading books like these. So, and that it's just the way it was back then, you know? So, I'm going to cut it off here. We just hit 20 minutes, so closing on 21 actually. So I'm going to cut it off here. Thank you all for watching. Thank you for the wonderful comments I got on my first couple of videos in this series. And there's going to be more to come, don't worry. But yeah, just covering stuff that got me started. You know, this was one facet of that. So till next time, peace. And I'll see you soon. Take care.